Welcome to the next show. My name is Petra Seipp. I work for Accenture Song, the world's largest tech-powered creative group. And I'm very pleased to be here today talking about the intersection of biology and business. I lead the marketing transformation team here out of the region, and I look after many of our life sciences clients specifically. That brings me here with a high interest in learning more from Parneet Pal.
Hi, Petra. How are you?
Thank you. Great. Very pleased to be here. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Petra, I'm very happy to be here in Hamburg for the next conference, and I spoke there earlier today. I'm a physician educator. I run a company called Systematically Well, and my focus is really teaching skills and communicating ideas that advance personal, workplace, and planetary health. So if you think about the intersections of lifestyle medicine, behavior change, and neuroscience, those are the things that I bring together and talk about and teach in organizations.
Amazing. Tell us a little bit, you are here now, but how did that all start?
Well, it started in India, in Bombay, where I grew up, and I was always a big fan of biology. I was always interested in it, and I loved learning about the human body. And I went on to medical school, became a physician, and part of my training, I then trained in the US. Through that journey, what I was noticing was that the emphasis was always on treating people after they fall sick, and very little attention was being paid on how do we help people stay well? How do we prevent all the illness? And when you look at the data, the research is very clear that 80 to 90% of what counts for all of the disease and suffering, all the chronic lifestyle-related diseases that we suffer from are preventable when we pay attention to how we sleep, how we eat, how we move, and how we manage our stress. So I was interested in putting that data into action, and so that's become the focus of my work.
I want to talk about data a little bit later, but this morning I heard you saying this very, very interesting thing about mitochondria. They are our biological microchips. So, in fact, are they the world's oldest supercomputers?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's one way of thinking about it. So for those, who may not know what mitochondria are, they are all of our cells, and not just our cells, but all plants and animals have this organelle or part of the cell that takes in the food and breaks down the food to release energy. So that's one of the main functions of mitochondria. So everything that you do, that energy that is powering our system comes from mitochondria. And mitochondria are these ancient bacteria through millions of years of evolution have evolved in cells of plants and animals and human beings. But mitochondria are amazing because not only are they producing energy, but you can think of them, as I mentioned, like this biological microchip, because they act as this dynamic interface between what's happening in our external environment and what's happening in our internal environment. And the whole goal of the mitochondria is to keep us healthy. So they are really trying hard to keep our body within a safe operating zone. And that zone is called homeostasis, which is just a fancy way of saying what is the pH and temperature and other conditions in the body where our cells can be healthy. And so because we expose ourselves to so many different stressors, right? Like the physical stressors, environmental stressors, social stressors, mental, emotional stressors in our lives, mitochondria are listening to that information and then responding to that information by making changes in our cells, in our genome, by making changes to our hormones, our neurotransmitters, and really trying to calibrate that zone of health. And sometimes, when that kind of external pressure is too much, that's when we start to get into trouble and have inflammation in the cells. And we can talk more about that.
That would be amazing. So would you say, obviously we live in times of polycrisis, and not just with the pandemic, but over the last years, many of the stress factors to many of us, I would say, have definitely increased. Is that something that is measurable? And here we come to the data point. Is that something that is measurable within our bodies as well?
Yes, I mean, so stress is just a very broad term. So when we want to measure what's going on in the body, and specifically if we're talking about mitochondrial health, it's very difficult beyond sort of like the research labs to directly measure what's, mitochondrial health. There are some labs, for example, at Columbia University that are doing really good work around going deep, and they've developed, measures like the mitochondrial health index, but that's still sort of a very research-focused measurement. But for the rest of us, as physicians and as healthcare providers, we can measure different metrics of our metabolism. So metabolism just means all the hundreds and thousands of chemical reactions that are happening every single minute in our body that are keeping us alive. So the food that we eat is broken down into energy, and then the waste products that we produce are eliminated. The body is making sure that hormones and neurotransmitters are being produced, and that we're building proteins for the structure and function. So all these things that are happening right now, all of that is metabolism. And what we can do in the blood is we can measure different aspects of that metabolism. So things like a blood sugar level, or levels of hormones like insulin, or we can look at what is the lipid profile, which refers to the different kinds of cholesterol in the blood. So many, many different ways that you can measure the outputs of the metabolism, and that gives us an idea of how healthy or not we are.
We're now very much talking about the individual, but what does that mean, for the greater good? What does that mean for families, for the workplace? How is that affecting really us and our surroundings?
And that's such an important question, Petra, because, my interest is not just personal health. When we started learning more about climate change and biodiversity loss, so for many, many years, I've been sort of following that conversation. And I started noticing the parallels between, all the destruction that was happening outside, and noticing that our personal health and the levels of inflammation in our body were also sort of rising in a similar manner. And that's not a coincidence, because our bodies and our biology is part of nature. And so basically what's happening is that the lives and the lifestyles that we're leading, we are hitting up against the limits of our biology. We're hitting up against the limits, even though our mitochondria are trying really hard. They're doing their best to keep us healthy. But when we exceed those limits of the biology, the downside is that levels of inflammation in the cells goes up. So inflammation is your body's natural protective immune response. So the body is trying to fight that stress and keep you well. But if you're constantly exposing yourself to a lot of stress without giving time for your body to heal and to repair, then the levels of that inflammation stay really high. And now we know from the research that even low levels of that inflammation affect our moment-to-moment decision-making. And this has really important ramifications for us with our families, in the workplace, for politicians, for businesses, because when we are inflamed, we have a tendency to just grab onto whatever is in front of us, because the body thinks that, oh, right now my survival is at stake, and so I must reach for and protect myself. So what this means is that we become more impulsive. It's really hard for us to delay gratification. We think in just the short term, and we get stuck in these old patterns of thinking and doing, which is very, very harmful. So if you think about, for our own personal health, this means that we're just going to put off our health and well-being. I'll do it tomorrow. Or the choices that we make for, the kinds of foods that we eat, or whether or not we exercise or get our sleep, everything, that kind of inflammation affects our decision making there. But then as businesses, when we think of the business strategy and how we're thinking about the effects that our products are having on consumers and on planetary health, that's when some of the, that information can impact the decision making as well.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I mean, that has a huge effect then, on everything we do. And as you said, it's really the decision making then, which can be from a very small decision actually lead to a huge impact. Now, what can we actually do to make biology work for us rather than against us?
Yeah, many things. I think the first thing is just to get curious about your body. When we actually learn about how our body works, and you don't have to be a scientist or you don't have to look at the research papers, but just get a little bit curious and try to understand, even hopefully based off this conversation, those who are listening get curious about mitochondria and can Google mitochondria and look up at their origin story and what they do in the body, for example. So that's the first thing. Get curious about what is my body doing and how can I help my body work at its best. And why would you want your body to work at its best? Because I think all of us want to have meaningful impact in the world, right? We want to live lives of purpose and we want to have the energy to do that. We want to have the focus and the creativity to do that. We also have to have the stamina to do all this hard work and to meet all the challenges. And that's how biology can really help us, is to, when we align our lifestyle, so start to take a look at what is the rhythm of your life? How are you, when are you staying awake? How much sleep are you getting? What is the quality of food on your plate? Are you getting enough movement? Do you have strategies to handle your stress? So those are some good starting points to start to take a look at how you can optimize your mitochondrial health.
Mm-hmm. Great. I have to say, I have about half a year actually started to track how much I sleep with an Oura ring.
Yes.
And I know it's all about gamification and it's telling me, okay, you haven't slept enough, you don't get a crown today. But actually, sleeping at least 6 hours and just making sure I get that sleep has really improved my well-being so much. And I guess that's the first step that you can take. But then sleep isn't everything. It's fundamental, but it isn't everything. What about, food, for example?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when it comes to food, again, when you understand the way your biology works, then it becomes very simple. So if you think about the fact that mitochondria have evolved over 1.5 billion years in our cells, and over that time, they have learned how to break down food and produce energy from plant-based foods that grew in these really rich, organic, microbiome-rich soils. And so when we eat foods, whole foods that are grown in these microbiome-rich soils, which simply means a healthy soil, then the energy conversion, so you can think of it just like any other kind of cell battery that you might have, that kind of energy conversion in the cell is really efficient and you get very few inflammatory byproducts. Mm-hmm. But when we stress the mitochondria by eating all the man-made foods, right? Unfortunately, right now, most of our consumption is through junk and processed foods. And that is not what the biology is designed for. And so your biology has to work extra hard. And what ends up happening is that the levels of that inflammation, which you don't want, skyrockets. And so it's no coincidence that, as our eating habits have changed over time, the levels of all the chronic diseases that are, related to the food consumption have also increased.
Mm-hmm. And what about movement?
Movement is essential. I mean, our ancestors, walked long distances as hunters and gatherers, and our bodies are designed to move, and our mitochondria and our cells are actually yearning. They long for movement because when we move, and it could be any kind of movement that you like to do, right? It doesn't have to be just going to the gym. So even just walking or swimming or whatever your fun activity might be, when you do that, that's a signal to the mitochondria where they actually upregulate. It's almost like giving them like a little nudge, like a friendly nudge. And they're like, oh, we have this, we need to produce more energy to do this kind of work. And so all the systems inside get optimized and all the genes that are helpful, that help you to have that kind of endurance and to repair your cells better, all of that gets turned on. So movement is really essential. Yeah.
So keeping our mitochondria happy is something that does take quite a bit of effort and might also be quite costly. Are there any, small tricks, something that everyone can get started with right away?
Yeah, and I don't know that it's that expensive, but it does involve some effort for sure. I think all the science of behavior change points to the fact that it becomes easier for us. We all know what we need to do, right? We all have an intuitive sense of what is good for our bodies, right? Like you don't have to read a research paper. I mean, you could, but
if you have time.
Yeah. But the key to behavior change is to start small. So just start with one thing. So even based off this conversation, if there was something in the conversation that you were like, oh, I need to read up more about that, or maybe I can change a little bit about my movement, or maybe I can add, one meal in the week that is just completely plant-based, or whatever the case might be. Just starting small is a good way to do it. So because I know we all lead very busy lives. But then the other important part about behavior change is surrounding yourself as much as possible with people and things that are aligned to this new kind of lifestyle that you want to lead. It's very hard to make change just by yourself. And we have to be kind to ourselves and know that it's okay. It's not about perfection, but it's about how can I have the best impact in the world with my energy? And how can I make sure that I am doing everything I can to help my body give me that kind of focus and creativity to do it?
Amazing. I also learned about the circadian rhythm. Talk to us a little bit about that and what effects that has on our bodies, please.
Yes. So the circadian means in a 24-hour period. So circadian rhythm is a very beautiful part of our biological design where the genes in our cells turn on and off, and all the metabolic reactions in our body turn on and off. They follow this pattern of productivity and then rest and repair, productivity and then rest and repair. So this kind of oscillation during a 24-hour period is called the circadian rhythm. So when we wake up in the morning and the sun is out, that light acts as a stimulus to our mitochondria and other cells to say, hey, wake up. This is a time to eat. This is a time to move. This is a time to build. So this is the part of the day where the hormones and neurotransmitters and all the reactions in the body get into gear to help us to do that. And then in the evening, when the sun sets, that is a signal. Our body picks up the signal, oh, now it's time to rest. And so a whole other set of metabolic reactions come online. And this is really, really important because, as you mentioned before, your sleep, when your sleep improved, you felt better. And this is a part where I think a lot of us miss out on in terms of our circadian rhythm, because if we lose sleep, then we miss out on a huge part of that repair and restoration process, which is important for our metabolism to be optimized. So that's what the circadian rhythm is. And so the takeaway is, how can you start to look at your routines every day and see if you can make them a little more consistent, make them a little more aligned to what's happening outside in nature, and to sync up, when nature tells us it's time to be awake, and then when nature tells us it's time to rest.
Nature, that's a very good word to pick up for me on. Well, we heard that, it's all about plant-based food, and or try to focus more on plant-based food, try to get the right sleep. Well, talk to us a little bit more about how harming the earth actually is also harming ourselves and what effects that has.
So that's a big question. So, but one example of how that happens is we have to remember that, first of all, our bodies are a multi-species ecosystem. So we like to think that we are these siloed little structures moving around. But actually, first of all, mitochondria in our cells are ancient bacteria, right? And then second of all, our bodies have trillions of bacteria, viruses, and fungi that live on our skin, that live inside our body, especially our gut, and that's called the microbiome. Mm-hmm. And so we have more sort of microbial, or almost as many microbial cells as the rest of the cells in our body.
Yeah.
So the first thing is to shift that perception of like, what is my body made of? It's made of my cells, but it also has all these other organisms. And then how these organisms, so we are like a host to these organisms. Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful symbiotic relationship. So in return for hosting these organisms, they work really hard for us. So they're involved in every possible aspect of our health. So digestion, immunity, regeneration, our mental health, our physical health, allergies, all of that is all of our microbiome and mitochondria are involved in those reactions. And how do you keep them healthy? Well, the diet is a huge part of it. So the microbiome loves these plant-based foods, fiber-rich foods. And so when we feed our body in that way, that's when they thrive, because you want to have a good biodiversity, many, many different thousands of species in your body to keep you healthy. But now if you notice what's happening on the outside is that because of our modern industrial agricultural practices and sort of, big food, the quality of the soil is depleting. Mm-hmm. And so is the quality of the plants that are grown, which means that the food that we eat, even if we say, I'm going to do the best thing and I'm going to eat the most healthy diet, unfortunately, the quality of the nutrients in those plant-based foods is decreasing. Mm-hmm. So if that biodiversity decreases, that means there's less biodiversity on our plates, which means there's less biodiversity in our microbiome, which means we're not going to be as healthy. This is why we're seeing skyrocketing rates of autoimmune disorders. We're seeing lots of inflammation. We're seeing stress and depression and anxiety go up, and many other chronic diseases. And this is because we're losing that biodiversity of our mm-hmm. microbiome in part. So that's one example of how when we harm the earth, we are literally harming the self, because we're all part of the same system.
So really, the loss of, biodiversity is affecting our personal health.
Yes, and it's a big problem, and it's it's not a problem that an individual can solve. Mm-hmm. But I think a couple of things that we can do is, number one, pay attention to the food choices, right? So as much as possible, go for the whole foods, plant-based foods. And I also realize that we are in very privileged positions because we have the capacity to make this choice, whereas most of the world doesn't have access to those choices. So I'm very aware of that, but at least the rest of us can make that choice. But then on a more global level, then I think it's about how can we influence in whatever capacity we have, whether it's our community, whether it's our organizations that we work in, or the politicians that we vote for, to get curious about how are those policies going to affect the biodiversity in nature. And that's another way of influencing and helping that kind of change. Mm-hmm.
And if we look at the individual level again, I mean, if, the organic fruit I buy in the supermarket actually doesn't have the right nutrients anymore that it used to have, 50, 100 years ago, mm-hmm. what can I do?
There's nothing that you can do in that moment, obviously. I would say still try to find the best fresh fruit and vegetables products that you can. But then I think just looking for the ways that you can get involved in projects that conserve soil. So this is actually a whole movement, global movement, where we are pointing to raising awareness of the fact that the quality of the soils is depleting, and then maybe investing, in those projects which are helping to regenerate the soils and bring up the level of the organic matter, which will then help to improve the quality of the foods grown there.
Great. So we've heard, small steps count. And to wrap up, maybe what should I do when we get out of here? What's like the first thing you would recommend that could help with making my mitochondria much happier?
I think the small thing you can do is to just get curious about your biology. And so if there was one thing or one word that you heard during our conversation that piqued your curiosity, just go Google it, learn more about it, and that will help start you on this journey of exploration. And hopefully, I want everyone to start to fall back in love with their biology, to notice the beautiful design of our bodies and the fact that they are designed to keep us well. And then to lean into, you start noticing and saying, oh yeah, that makes sense. And maybe I can get an extra 15 minutes of sleep, or maybe I can switch up that food for this food, or maybe I can help my community in this way. So it's going to be different for different people. So just get curious and then just start leaning step by step into the first thing that inspires you.
Great. Parneet, thank you so much for sharing all these insights on the next show. It's been lovely to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Petra.